Hey everybody, Questwise here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about rifts again. After my last video on rifts, I had some questions from some folks in the comments down below of the video and on Facebook asking how to go about um, starting a game or starting a campaign of rifts for maybe somebody who's never played before, nobody who's maybe have never run the game before. And how I go about that and setting up a game, having a little bit more experience than some other folks out there and stuff as well too. So I'm going to break it down for you. This is going to be probably a two-part video on how I structure a Rifts campaign when I'm going to start something brand new. And I guess the first piece of advice I would give would be, and this is going to cover, this is going to go far and above to help out no matter what you're doing with Rifts, because Rifts is a very huge universe. Rifts has a very large scope, if you will. The power levels can be really, really insane if you don't try to rein them in early on. And so one of the things I would highly recommend is to start small. We're going to focus on just using the core rulebook, which is the Ultimate Edition, and you branch out from there. And I would say we're just going to focus on just the core book, because the core book has a ton of great stuff in it that will keep you busy for years and years running a campaign if you want to. But I know that it's really alluring to branch out and look at other things like some of the world books, say like Atlantis or the Vampire Kingdoms or England, Soviet Russia. There's a lot of other great books out there that you may want to explore. But for the sake of this video, we're going to focus on just using the core book, the Ultimate Edition. So the first thing I would say, your very first step that you want to make is that you want to determine the power level of your game. Don't be afraid to set any boundaries right off the bat. We're going to break this down, break Rifts basically as a whole into three levels, low, medium, and high power levels. Low is going to be things like focusing on character classes or OCCs like the Merc Soldier, the Headhunter, Adventurers and Scholars, that whole section, and Coalition Grunts, Specialists, and Tech Officers. Now, we'll get to that a little bit later. You can run this game as a completely Coalition campaign where you're playing officers and soldiers and dog boys and stuff that work for the Coalition. And in fact, I really love running that way because while the Coalition is sort of the big bad in this game, right? It's the villainous organization in this game. It's interesting to run characters who start to experience that for their own, right? And then they can kind of decide where they fall into that spectrum. Are they going to, fight back against the Coalition, again, become traitor and change their ways and begin to accept other things like DBs and magic users and such? Or are they going to stick to the Coalition things? Do they find that those things, that's a humanocentric idea of the Coalition as a good thing? And how do they go about operations where they have to go and kill, innocent bystanders, whether they be magic users or DBs or some kind of such? That's a completely different video for a different time. But for right now, low power level would be the Merc Soldiers, the Headhunters, the Adventurers and Scholars section, which is like the Body Fixer, the City Rat, etc. And then any kind of like low-level Coalition, Grunts, Specialist, Tech Officers. Medium level is going to be Crazies, Cyber Knights, Juicers, Practitioners of Magic, any of those, and Psychics. And then we're going to go into the high power level, which will be full conversion Borgs, Glitter Boys, Robot Pilots, and Dragons. I would say to start a campaign, if this is your very, very first time playing, I would say tell the players they're limited to a low power level. If you've played any other Palladium stuff, you know that Rifts sort of ups the bar when it comes to power level, per se, Because normally you're doing SDC damage, structural damage capacity, damages to things. When we get into rifts, almost everything, a majority of things, fall under the MDC, mega damage capacity. So normal SDC weapons are not going to harm anything with MDC armor. MDC weapons will decimate anything with SDC armor. So those are one of the little things you have to kind of look out for. But most everything in Rifts, if you're playing purely a Rifts campaign like we are out of this core book, you're not going to have to worry about too much. Almost all the armors will be MDC. All the weapons will be MDC. There might be a few things that are SDC. But I would say if this is your very first time running a game, to focus on low power level stuff. Merc soldiers, headhunters, adventurers and scholars, and coalition grunts, soldiers, specialists. Now, I know what you're saying. Those are the boring classes. Like, what am I going to do with those? I want more. I want a little bit of magic. I want a little bit of thing. The great thing about the way I've structured this is that the medium power level fits into sort of both categories, both low power category and high power category. Magic users of first level are going to fall in sort of the upper end of the low spectrum. But as they begin to progress, they're going to grow into that high power level of category. So if you have somebody who's just dead set on wanting to play a magic user or a psychic, it'll be okay in a low power setting. Just know that they will have abilities that are, above, beyond what your normal characters like a city rat or body fixer might have. So I would say set some boundaries first off and be like, okay, we're going to encapsulate this kind of thing and we're going to run this type of campaign. Now, after that, number 2 would be to determine your initial setting in your beginning adventure. Always, and I'm going to repeat this several times throughout this video, always start small. Don't think about a whole continent worth of games. Don't think about a whole, section of country. Focus on one city or town, or if you want to just focus it on Chi-Town, but more narrow it down to like the Chi-Town burbs. Don't think of the entire city or all of Michigan or something of that effect. Focus on something small. Start with a town or a city or a settlement that you can start your adventure in, and then branch out from there. So like I said, I'm going to say that a lot during this video, but start small. That's very important if you want to get into Rifts and sort of get a feel for the game. It's after you've had some experience that you can add this crazy gonzo, over-the-top, glitter boys fighting dragons kind of stuff. You can choose where you want to start, or what I like to do is I let the players decide. Sometimes step number 1 and 2 can switch back and forth. I've been oftentimes come to a table and said, okay, before we create characters, I want to know where you want to start. What sort of game do you want to play? And where would you like it to be set? Do you want it to be set in England? That's fine. Do you want it to be set in the southern part of the U.S. or what was the U.S.? Absolutely. So sometimes I'll let the players decide where they want to play, because really the game I want to run is for their enjoyment as much as it is for mine. And then sometimes we'll go back and then create characters based on that setting. But if you already have a setting designed or setting in mind, you can let the players know, hey, this is where we're going to be. Here's the kind of characters that fit that idea. Once you're sitting down to create, this is part on the game master side, and this video is going to be very heavily influencing the sort of game master side, the first time running a game of Rifts. But after you've decided your characters and where you're going to start, you need to decide who the adversaries are going to be. Is it going to be the coalition? Is it going to be monsters? Is it going to be demons? That kind of stuff. Here's where the game gets a little bit difficult. Palladium doesn't ever sort of group, they don't ever really group their monsters by power level. So, say like in a game like D&D, you're going to have, challenge ratings, those kinds of things, where it tells you, hey, this is a challenge rating level 1 monster, and that lets you know that that's pretty on par with some first level characters. or how many that you can throw at those first level characters that they're going to survive. Palladium doesn't do that. Now, this is a blessing and a boon. I noticed that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is doing this very much now. They're sort of like grouping things by character power level. And thus they'll be challenged, but they'll never be sort of overrun in an instant by some kind of crazy monster. To me, personally, I don't like that. I'm not a fan of the game scaling up with my characters. I like the world to feel dangerous. I want the world to feel deadly. I want characters to second think everything that's out there, right? I don't want them to walk into a bar full of cyborg crazies, right? And have them think, oh, well, we're second level. The game master's not going to throw anything at us that we can't handle. No, I want my players to be thoughtful and knowledgeable, and I want them to think through things before they sort of dive into crazy combat, or figure out a way to talk their way out of things. To me, that makes the world feel more real. You know, we're talking about a world that's like post-apocalyptic, crazy, gonzo, over-the-top action and magic. But there's a thing where you want to make the world feel somewhat believable. And to me, that means that there are things that could kill you outright at first level. The blessing and bane part of Palladium not giving power levels is that you need to do a little bit more research, thorough reading before you start throwing adversaries at your players that you really don't know where they fall in the spectrum. It's a blessing in the fact that it's cool, makes the world feel more dangerous. It's also a bane, though, that if you accidentally throw something out there that you didn't really think about too much, that's going to destroy them very quickly. Now, one way you can look at that, and the way I usually gauge things, a lot of times monsters and robots and power armor and stuff will be broken down by section of hit locations, right? And I'll look at the main body, what the MDC of the main body is, or the hit points of the main body. And I'll kind of I'll compare that to what my players have. And that'll give you a pretty good idea of what power level we're talking about here. So and I say that because if you look at the main body MDC of a demon or some kind of creature, if you that's the default sort of hit location, and if you lower that to 0, it effectively destroys the creature, or that shuts down the robot or the power armor or whatever. If it's somewhere in the spectrum that's even close to your player characters, it's a pretty good chance that you can throw this at them and they'll be okay. If it's not, if it's wildly different, like super high, above beyond where they are, I would be a little wary unless you have some sort of the diplomatic kind of thing going on. So a blessing and bane that Palladium doesn't really give you the sort of challenge level of a creature or adversary. So you have to do a little bit of work on your part before that. So as part number 2, know who your adversaries are going to be, and kind of line them up. Know the lore. Get very familiar with the setting. I am a big proponent of this. If you're going to run a game, read everything you can about the setting. Now, the core book has a great section on the world and how it came to be, and the current affairs of what is happening in the world right now. And there's tons of great information in there that will give you some really, really great background for some adventures and some campaigns, like little nuggets listed in the fluff and the lore. For me, have spawned entire campaigns and adventures by just picking something out of there. If you want to go a little bit more in depth and go back to the beginning of Rifts, and you want to dredge up something from like sort of modern day Earth, pick up Chaos Earth, or any of the supplements for that game as well too, because that is sort of like the prequel to Rifts. And I found that I really enjoy actually playing Chaos Earth because I really enjoy running the apocalypse as it's happening, sort of thing. Just more than I do Rifts, although Rifts is much bigger, and I do enjoy all of that as well. So know the lore, get to read all that kind of stuff. make sure you know your stuff, especially for the area you're going to run. If you're going to run a game in Chi-Town, make sure you know about the how the coalition works with that and how the city runs and that kind of stuff as well too. So that when you're into a game, you don't have to stop and look things up or make stuff up on the fly, which you will do anyway and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But just make sure you know your lore and your background so that the game flows a little bit easier if the players have any questions. Number 3, this is where you're going to begin to sort of incorporate the characters into the setting. So what I like to do, something like I told you before, what I like to do is I like to introduce the setting and get the players familiar with where we're going to be, and then have them build characters. Don't restrict the character or the players into the kind of role you want them to play, but set some boundaries. Like I said, set a power level and be like, hey, everything within this power level is available. And like I said, even the medium can kind of flop. The medium power level can sometimes be acceptable in a low level campaign as well too. Use only the core book to start with. If this is your first game of Rifts, I highly recommend just using the core book. Now, another blessing and bane is it has a lot of great stuff in the core book, but there are no monsters. So, luckily for you, if you're just starting out, the Rifts North American Bestiary Volume 1 is now out. It's available on their website. Go and check this thing out. It's got a buttload of great monsters and demons and, well, not demons, because demons are in a different book, but lots of great monsters and animals, just, average everyday bears, wolves, that kind of stuff, all in there. And I'm going to be doing a more thorough kind of, this will be part 2. We'll be talking about monsters and stuff as well too. But the core book doesn't have any monsters unless you want to run sort of versus the coalition campaign. It's easy to make some NPCs of coalition grunts and psi stalkers and that kind of stuff out of the core book. If you want to add some more crazy monsters, go check out the Rifts Bestiary, which is up on their website right now. If you're going to go outside the core book, if your players are absolutely dead set on playing in England, pick up the England book. It's cheap. It's not very thick. I would recommend sticking with some of the earlier world books like England and Atlantis, although Atlantis can be kind of crazy. Africa, some of those kind of, Australia is a great one. I love the Australian book. It's a lot of fun to run stuff out of. But if they're dead set on playing something that's outside of the core book, pick up that book, let them, again, chunk those things down into power levels and be like, okay, here's the things that are available for this starter campaign. Next, number 4, your first session. When you sit down, build the setting then. Once you have everything sort of established, sit down and be like, who, and this is going to be, I do this for every campaign that I sit down and I work with the players. My first session is that we lay out who, what, when, and where. Where are we playing? What time period are we playing? Are we doing early on in Rifts? The current sort of timeline in Rifts? Are we going back to Chaos Earth? What are we doing? What is our characters' goals in this sort of, at least this first session, or several sessions? And who's the bad guys? Who are we? What are we doing? Are we mercenaries? Are we coalition soldiers? Are we survivors? Are we part of a town militia? That kind of stuff. So ask those questions: who, what, when, and where, and it will, take some notes as a game master, but you will get a very nice chunk of information that you can build the whole campaign from just in that first session. This is a given anywhere in the literary world, but show, don't tell. When you don't info dump on the first session. Introduce stuff slowly, like describe the town you're in, describe the city, describe some of the businesses and stuff, but don't go into like a half an hour-long dissertation on the world setting. Introduce that stuff as it's necessary, as it's needed. Let that stuff sort of flow naturally, and you'll have a much better sort of reception to. There'll be less glassy eyes of people just staring at you if you slowly introduce information as it's needed, and I think the players will much more appreciate rather than just info dumping a bunch of stuff onto them. Offer them several story hooks. This is a big one. Now, this is a hard part for new game masters and stuff as well too. Um, my preferred style of play is to improv. I'll come up with a campaign idea. I'll come up with an idea for the very first session. But the one thing I've learned over my years of game mastering is that players will always do the unexpected. As a group mentality, they are all going to have their own sort of ideas of how the game should play or how they want to interact with the game. So your best laid plans will always go amok. They will always find ways to steer away from what you already had planned. So I like to try things a little bit looser. I'll offer up several story hooks, and I'll have little seeds for each one of those in my mind or written in my notebook, my Game Master notebook, about where I want to sort of proceed with that storyline, and then let them choose. So I might have, say, for instance, we're in a town, and one of the story seeds might be a missing girl. Okay, parents have come to us, want us to help find a missing girl. Number two could be a strange shipment has arrived via coalition, hover tank, and has been delivered to a nondescript building that you've never really paid much attention to before. There's another story seed. Number three might be that a wizard, some kind of a magic user, practitioner of magic, has arrived near death. He's stumbled out of a rift and just fallen into the street in front of you. But you are deep in the heart of coalition territory. What do you do? So there's a bunch of different little story seeds that you can lay out there and have the players sort of choose and pick where they want to sort of go with this, and then let it go. Let them, kind of run with it. But be flexible. You're going to have to be very flexible with this game because, like I said, this game is very gonzo. And again, players will want to explore the parts of the world that they want to explore. So be able to be flexible and have some buff up on your improv skills. Be a little bit able to dodge in any direction you want, but don't sort of hamper them into railroading them into one particular thing. Don't get bogged down in the rules. Some of the rules in Rifts can be a bit daunting. For instance, missile rules always confused me, like firing off a salvo and how that all works and how many strike and that kind of stuff. It gets a little bit cranky, but don't get bogged down in the rules so much. Let the rules just be sort of a structure, a guide. And if you have to sort of ad lib something to the rules, be consistent with that. So for the rest of your adventure, that session, be consistent on how that rule sort of works that you've sort of implemented. House rule, if you will. At the end of the session, you can review it and then talk to the players and be like, okay, how do we want to proceed? Do we like it the way that we house ruled it, or do you want to write it, play out rules as written or raw? And talk with them about that after the thing. Don't let the rules bog you down in the session, because nothing brings an imagination to a screeching halt than stopping to flip through a rule book for 20 minutes to find a rule. So be flexible. So just kind of roll with the punches, as it were. So Rift contains a lot of material, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You really have to sort of focus on starting small, number one, growing from there. If your players want to get to a point where they want to include everything, you can grow into that. That's something that you can experience later. Also, don't be afraid if a player starts playing a character and they don't like it after a session or two, it's just not what they expected. Don't be afraid to let them change the character. Let that character they're playing kind of go off and introduce a new character somehow. And it's super easy to do. Have them give you suggestions on how this new character arrives. But don't force anybody into playing a character that they just don't like. This didn't pan out the way that they wanted to. So be flexible in that regard as well, too. Let me tell you a little story about my first session of Rifts. And this will give you a good reason on why I tell you to start small and to focus on the power levels. My first session of Rifts, we went into this game thinking all was fair in love and war, right? And so we created some characters. We fighting against the coalition. We were in this town, and we were going to ambush this coalition supply train that was going by. My friend Trevor was playing a glitter boy. My cousin Dan was playing a mercenary soldier. I was playing a mine melter, and I can't remember. There was somebody else in the party, somebody else who had joined us as well too, and I'm pretty sure he was a juicer, right? So here we are trying to hide inside of a building to wait for this caravan to go by, and we were going to blow it up and steal all the stuff from it. First of all, my friend Trevor's playing a glitter boy. This is a 10-foot tall, chrome-colored robot. It was pretty hard to conceal. Once we realized that the coalition soldiers were onto us and they began to target us with their weapons, we decided we were going to instantly fight back. I reached out and stopped the tank commander, the first big tank, was one of those big floating skull hover tank things. I reached out as a mine melter and stopped the commander of the tank so the tank would stop. I'm standing directly next to Trevor's glitter boy. Trevor decides he's going to fire the boom gun. The game master laughs because at this point I think the game master, while he was still fresh with this, kind of knew that what we were doing was kind of gonzo. Says, sure, you can do that. It's going to take a minute though because you have to anchor yourself to the ground because this thing creates a sonic boom. And I was like, wait, sonic boom? I'm standing right next to him. Yes, folks, it played out exactly what you're imagining. This boom gun goes off, blows me across the room, not only nearly kills me from the falling debris, but I am permanently deaf now. So you can kind of see the craziness that can happen when you have these crazy mixed power levels. Our juicer character went and slaughtered nearly everybody. The coalition grunts didn't really stand a chance to him once he popped his combat drugs and went crazy. So you can see sort of the power levels and how those things, you need to rein them in a little bit if you want to have a consistent game of Rifts. If your goal is to play something completely gonzo and over the top, go for it. If that's your style of play, if that's the thing that you want to do, and it's totally possible in Rifts, go for it. But I would say if you want to have a very consistent, long-running campaign and you want to have everybody sort of enjoy themselves without having to make characters over and over and over again, do that. Break it down by power levels and just be sort of consistent. Like I said, don't restrict anything, but don't let them get kind of out of that whack. Don't let them go anywhere between higher than medium if you're playing a low level kind of thing. What we're going to do at the end in the next video, the next session, like I said, it's going to be a two-part video. We're going to talk about the evolution of the game beyond the first session. We're going to talk about how the campaign can progress, how characters sort of level up, and how that's all going to work out. We're going to talk about the amount of options that are available as you kind of grow in power level, and then we're going to talk about other settings, other sort of world books and other settings, and introducing more and more books to your setting. But until next time, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via private message or put some notes down below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. But thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm Questwise, and I am out.